The winter of 1991 was one of the coldest in decades, but for 4 restless soldiers stationed in Germany, it was the perfect excuse for an adventure. Europe was opening up like a book filled with untold stories. The Iron Curtain had fallen, and the world beyond it, a world of mystery and history, was suddenly within reach. My friends and I, Lyle, Kevin, Eric, and myself, jumped at the opportunity to explore. Whenever we got leave, we packed up our gear and set off, eager to see places most of our peers would never dare venture. That January, we decided on Eastern Europe. The rugged Carpathian mountains called to us with their promise of unspoiled slopes and a raw, untamed wilderness. Skiing in Romania was a wild card. Tourism was still a fledgling concept, and the resorts, if you could call them that, were nothing like the glossy brochures of the Alps. But we were drawn to the unknown, the allure of untouched snow and trails without crowds. We arrived at a small, weathered lodge perched at the edge of a sprawling forest. It was humble, more of a cabin than a resort, but it had its charm. The wooden walls were lined with faded rugs. The hearth crackled with a constant fire, and the faint scent of pine and smoke filled the air. The owner, an older man with a grizzled beard and sharp eyes, greeted us with a mix of curiosity and caution. His English was rough, but he managed to convey that we were some of the first Americans to stay there. "We ski tomorrow," Lal declared as we unpacked our bags. "Fresh snow, no tourists. Just us and the mountain." We couldn't have imagined how prophetic and ominous those words would become. Our first 2 days in the Carpathians were everything we'd hoped for. The trails were wild and unpredictable, with snow so fresh it muffled every sound. No buzzing crowds, no lines at the lifts, just the creak of the old equipment as it carried us up the slopes and the whisper of wind through the trees. The mountain itself was a beast. Its craggy peaks loomed above us, shrouded in mist that seemed to curl and twist like living tendrils. The trees were ancient and towering, their gnarled roots breaking through the snow in jagged lines. It felt as though we were skiing on a mountain that had been untouched for centuries, a place that belonged to the earth more than to people. By the end of the second day, our bodies were sore but our spirits were high. We lingered at the top of the highest slope, watching as the sun began its slow descent behind the peaks. The sky bled into shades of orange and purple, casting long shadows across the snow. "We'll miss this place," Kevin said, his voice muffled by the scarf wrapped around his face. "It's the kind of spot you don't forget." I nodded, though something about the vast, silent wilderness below gave me pause. The mountain was beautiful, yes, but it also felt watchful. Just as we were preparing to make our final descent, they appeared. 2 women, gliding toward us like shadows against the snow. They wore fitted jackets that hugged their frames, and their movements were so fluid and confident, it was as if the mountain itself bent to their will. The taller one introduced herself as Alina. Her black hair spilled out from under her hood, and her sharp features were almost wolfish in their intensity. The other, Mirela, had a softer look, her green eyes glinting like shards of glass. They were stunning in a way that didn't seem quite real. "Americans?" Alina asked, her accent curling around the word. We exchanged pleasantries, and they explained that the mountain was mostly populated by old men and families. They'd been hoping to find people their own age to ski with. "They're lucky we're here," Lyle said, grinning. He always fancied himself the charmer of the group. I wasn't so sure. Something about the women put me on edge, though I couldn't put my finger on it. They smiled and laughed easily, but there was a sharpness to their gaze, a sense that they were sizing us up. When Alina noticed Kevin's flask of schnapps, she laughed. "Tourists drink like that," she teased, pulling out a small, ornate flask of her own. "Try this, it's local. Much stronger." She passed it around, and the guys, caught up in the moment, didn't hesitate. Lyle took a long swig, followed by Kevin, and then Eric. When it reached me, I hesitated. The flask was carved with strange symbols, faintly etched into the metal. It felt cold in my hands, colder than it should have been. I raised it to my lips but didn't drink, letting the liquid spill onto the snow. The women didn't seem to notice, but the bitter scent of whatever was inside clung to the air, sharp and metallic. After a few minutes of conversation, Alina asked if we'd heard of a trail called Devil's Forest. When we shook our heads, Mirella explained that it was a glade trail, a narrow path winding through the forest. "It's rarely open," she said, her voice low and teasing, "but it's the best on the mountain." We were intrigued. Glade trails were our favorite, and the idea of skiing through the trees in a place few had ventured was too tempting to resist. They led us away from the main trails, deeper into the woods. The path was narrow and steep, flanked by towering pines that blocked out much of the fading light. As we moved, the air grew colder, and the snow beneath our skis turned dense and uneven. "This feels off," I muttered to Kevin, who was skiing beside me. He shrugged, his face flushed from the schnapps. "It's an adventure, man. Relax." But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being led somewhere we didn't belong. When we reached a clearing, Alina and Mirella stopped abruptly. "This is the starting point," Alina said, gesturing to a downward slope that cut through a dense thicket of trees. Before we could respond, Kevin stumbled, his legs buckling beneath him. Lyle followed a moment later, his body collapsing into the snow like a rag doll. Eric barely had time to turn toward me before he began to wobble and dropped to one knee. "What did you give them?" I shouted, dropping my skis and rushing to Kevin's side. The women didn't answer. They just stared coldly at my fallen friends, a slight grin of satisfaction betrayed across their lips. Alina turned and called out into the woods, her voice sharp and commanding. A rustling sound followed, and 3 men emerged from the shadows. They were massive. One carried a club, the other a knife, and the third had a length of rope coiled around his shoulder. He was pulling a sled behind him, and on it were several boxes, the sight of which filled me with terror. They were medical containers, the kind used to transport organs. Their intention was clear. My first impulse was to run. I could have lost them in the woods, but that would leave my friends to their cruel intentions. I had to fight. I grabbed the nearest branch, a sturdy piece of wood poking out from a snowdrift. The first man lunged at me, swinging the club. I ducked and countered with a wild jab, catching him in the ribs. He grunted and stumbled back, but the second man was already closing in. His knife flashed in the dim light, and I barely managed to deflect his swing with my makeshift weapon. The branch splintered, but I kept swinging, desperation lending strength to my blows. I think the men were all drunk, as their attacks were slow and awkward. Good thing, or else I would have been finished pretty quickly. Eric stirred then, struggling to his feet. He was aware enough to understand the danger. He groaned and reached for another branch. Together, we fought off the attackers. I landed a lucky jab in the eye of one, and Eric delivered a clumsy but effective blow to another's knee. The men cursed and retreated, nursing their injuries as they disappeared into the woods with the same eerie silence they'd arrived with. The women were gone too. As the adrenaline faded, I realized how cold it had become. The sun was gone, and the temperature was plummeting. Kevin and Lyle were still unconscious, their breaths shallow and labored. "We can't move them far," Eric said, his voice hoarse. I nodded. "We'll have to stay here. Build a fire." We worked quickly, gathering branches and pine needles. The fire we built was small but warm, its light casting flickering shadows across the snow. We wrapped our friends in extra layers and huddled close, taking turns keeping watch. The night was long and filled with strange sounds. The creak of trees, the distant howl of wind, and once a faint, echoing laugh. When dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. Kevin and Lyle stirred, groggy but alive. With the sun as our guide, we began the slow trek back to the lodge. Every step was agony. Our bodies were battered, our minds frayed. But when we finally saw the weathered wooden building in the distance, a wave of relief washed over us. The lodge owner listened to our story with wide eyes, crossing himself repeatedly. "Haiduk. Outlaws," he said. "They hide in the mountains. Dangerous people. Ghouls." I muttered, "What kind of people would rob others of their organs?" The police arrived hours later. They took our statements but seemed indifferent, as though such incidents were too common to warrant much effort. We left the next day, shaken but grateful to be alive. To this day, I don't know who those people were. And what was in that flask? I'm glad Eric had a change of heart when trying it. He had only a few sips before pretending to drink it like me. I'll never forget the look in those girls' eyes. Cold, calculating, and far too knowing. The Carpathians are beautiful, but they hold secrets dark and ancient. And some of those secrets are best left undisturbed.